of sort of master planners, grand master planners who can actually do a lot of things with whatever it is that they plan is gone. We exist in an era today where, in a sense, one would hope that the colonial mentality that infected planning completely, and that in a sense was part of that it has certain aesthetic values. No, then the issue has to be why should something be preserved at a time when allowing it to change may be precisely what the people who live there want it to be. For example, I would argue that had the people making decisions about what to do with the main square outside of Haramansar been more informed of the history of colonial interventions, maybe they would have ended up with a different kind of square outside of that area than the one that they have right now, which in a sense is partly an expansion of what is inside. But you know, my understanding is that this was an area that at one point in time had green space, so it's unfortunate that that green space got lost. It's unfortunate that the residents of that area did not necessarily have much say in how it should have been made. And it's not like an either-or situation. You could have actually achieved both. It's a form of planning that I would argue would just benefit from this kind of sensitivity that history often offers. Anything else? Do you want to watch anything of the short clips of modern times? Okay. So play. It's actually not modern times. It's here we see. Do we have it? Okay. Yeah. What happened again? Okay, so this is Playtime, and this is a film that is produced literally 12 years after the one that I showed you, which is called Mon Oncle. Mon Oncle actually is a very good commentary on urban renewal, which is the subject of tomorrow, which has to do with you destroy what is there and you build what is new. Playtime is about this cynical modernity, the fallacy of modernity, that you create modernity, but modernity comes with very specific forms that instead of enhancing communication, they do the exact opposite. So the story, Monsieur Hulot, who's the same character that appears in Mon Oncle, appears here, and the entire film is about he's trying to reach someone who works in one of these modern offices, and he can never reach them. And he gets lost in the maze of modernity, if you will. So I'll show you a few of these clips. This is a very interesting scene where there are American tourists visiting Paris, but they never get to see Paris except in reflections. So every time they open a door or a window and it's glass, they see the Eiffel Tower or they see the Sacré-Cœur, but they never get there. And again, this has to do with glass and what glass does to people. 1960s, so that's the beginning of sort of Corbusian architecture now that people have experienced it. Again, reflection of the Sacré-Cœur. But the Sacré-Cœur itself is never there. In fact, it never appears in the film. Okay, this is one. And then this is the second one. This is an interesting one. The guy is drunk. Okay. And then there's this one. So that's Monsieur Hulot trying to find this other guy that he's looking for. And they are like right next to each other. But then he they're still searching for each other. But then, of course, he loses him. And then there's this one, which is also a very interesting commentary on television. So the entire family is like completely glued to this thing that's coming out of the wall. But then Tati is also brilliant because then he shows you the other family on the other side. And it's also glued to the same instrument. So look at how they react on the other side of the room altogether. It's as if, in fact, it's a glass that is between them. It is not a television. And then, of course, he enlarges, the focus in this case to include 4 apartments. And in the film, he continues 6 and 8. And this is the last one. This has to do with the group of Americans who are sort of visiting the city still. Okay, that's it. Okay, so now I hand it over to Sakshi and Kieran. We get the lights. You guys don't need, you'll show some videos, or you will. Okay, very good. Okay.
And then take it. A very good afternoon, everyone. So in this particular session, what we are going to essentially do is we have actually three components here. A small sort of I would say a background to the tutorial which we are going to run. So we talk about utopias and realism and whether there is a possibility to merge them together, which we find in our examples as of now as well. And then we look at some of these videos which give us something about the future of cities and also the Indian context. And after that we have a small sort of an exercise, which is a group exercise within all of you. So you get divided into small groups and then you actually try and answer a very simple question that we have. And in a way, the question is all that we've been doing these past couple of days, and whether we can really carry some of this in terms of solving the problem of existing cities. So this is what we are going to essentially do at the moment. Right. Well, the two have already met a couple of times, and there are areas of contradictions and contrasts, as we know. The two, when we talk about the two, we are referring to the utopian ideas and the realities which we actually see, or they emerge from the ideas themselves, and the kind of contradictions or complementing situations which they might have actually, provided in real life situations. Now, well, this is one of the earliest usage of the word utopia, and Sir Thomas More, I mean this is somewhere in 1516, and Sir Thomas More wrote this epic book which is called Utopia. And utopia, the word itself refers to, it comes from Greek origins if I'm not wrong, and it refers to actually no space or no land for that matter. Now when we say no land, it is absolutely something which exists in our imagination. So you are imagining it, it is existing in your imagination, but it does not really exist as such on ground. And that is why it is a utopian sort of an idea, a no land which exists somewhere in your stretch of imagination itself. So Sir Thomas More actually, he was able to use this word, and he actually spoke about society, an isolated sort of society, an island society I would say, which was somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, close to Latin America itself. And he describes the utopian way of life, the kind of forms, the kind of ways, societal issues, etc., which should be dealt with in this particular epic book, which continues to be in print even today. So the word itself, as I mentioned, comes from these origins. And since then, we have been, all of us, we've been, ever since we were children, we always had these ideas about the kind of place we would like to, visit or be with. And as we grow up and get groomed into this profession, possibly we critically examine the different ideas which has been thrown to us and the fact that when we can make use of them or not. So many different, if you go and if you have a look or if you search or Google utopias, then you'll come across multiple images of this particular nature, and some of them are really, really something which come out from a movie itself, a so-called a fiction movie, and you have these multiple sort of skyscrapers and then the roads intervening through, or you have these green cities which are now the talk of the town in terms of creating more sustainabilities, so that when you don't have space, you actually use the space adjoining your mobility spaces itself. So these are the kind of things which human beings are trying to deal with in terms of constructing their own utopian ideas. So utopia, what really are we talking about? Are we talking about an abstract idea? Definitely it's a product of fertile imagination and a concept which is futuristic for sure. A vision as we might conceive, and it may or may not be impossible. So today's utopias, as we already know, I mean when we go back into history, many of them actually saw some flights of reality as well. And one of the things about utopias which Le Corbusier has mentioned is what gives our dreams a daring is they can be achieved. So we have these dreams, we have these sort of utopian ideas, and then we try and actually put them into materialization. So possibly this exists somewhere. Well, we have also come through in literature. For example, all these, there's this very interesting paper by Robert Fishman. And in this paper, what Robert Fishman does is he looks at urban utopias, and he looks at primarily three major or rather significant contributors to utopia. Frank Lloyd Wright, and then he looks at Le Corbusier, and then he looks at Ebenezer Howard. And then he tries, and he says that the start point was one. And what was the start point? This was a post-industrial city, which actually created this race for some kind of a land which was there in your speck of imagination, and you can actually translate it into reality. So each one of them began with a critique of the city. And when Frank Lloyd Wright, for example, he says that the city as of now is a cross-section of a fibrous tumor. He says so. And then all of them, they talk about it in many different ways, and they use terms which are related to, the human body itself. For example, Le Corbusier says at a point of time in one of his epic works again, that Paris is, fatally diseased, and something radical has to be done in order to sort out the problems in Paris. And similarly, Louis Mumford uses the word, again, urban cancer, urban disorder, and so forth and so on. And one of the interesting quotes which I take from Le Corbusier here is, what is a city all about? So he says, vast stretches covered with crusts of houses without hearts and furrowed with streets without a soul. So very interesting, and you try and put your imagination and your world power into it to get something which even the common person is able to relate to so efficiently and easily. And on the other side, you have these ideas, looking at the existing city, which is something like you don't want to, it's fatally flawed, you have nothing much to do with the city. It is diseased and there is nothing you can do about it. So what do? You indulge in a flight of fancy. And what do? The flights of fancy take you to these many different concepts which a city should be all about. So what a city should be all about, it should definitely be egalitarian, no class. It should be completely humanitarian kind of a city. Everybody must have an access to equal opportunity. And then I came across this very interesting piece of work by Claude Lévi-Strauss, and where he says that a city is actually a social work of art. Indeed, very interesting, because he himself was possibly an anthropologist, and he speaks about city not as a work of art, but as a social work of art. And in fact, while mentioning so, he actually critiques some of these utopian thinkers, and he actually says that a city is not a product of, it can't be a product of one genius called Le Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright or anybody for that matter. It is definitely a product of thousands of minds. So it's a product of thousands of decisions. Each one of you is taking a decision. So therefore, what a city is ultimately, it's a product of thousands of these different decisions. So how can a city be designed by this very small group of people who call themselves, technocrat planners, all this group of people who are, expert planners like, say, Le Corbusier for that matter. So therefore, he stood at a point which was possibly diagonally opposite to what these utopian planners were sort of thinking, but at the same time assuming some similarities there. So you find a lot of these interesting dialogues and conversations when you actually look at the literature for that matter on utopia. Now, one of the questions which Robert Fishman again mentions in his paper is that all these different people who had radically, they come out with different ideas about utopianism, but yet the start point was one, and that was the critique of the city. And the question which they try and ask is, what is the ideal city of the 20th century that best expresses the power and beauty of modern technology? So of course, the setting is definitely post-industrial setups. And what are the most enlightened ideas of social justice? So these are the questions at that point of time the utopian planners were trying to really research on. And as a result of this, they come to, even though the ideas were remarkably different from each other, there were a certain set of, I would say, points on which they actually stood common ground. So one of them was that these people, they rejected the idea of the existing city completely. As I already mentioned to you, they used derogatory words in many places. So they thought that the existing city was history, and it had lived its life. So it was gone. Ebenezer Howard said that the city has lived its life. So therefore, if it has lived its life, it's like a human being. You've lived your life, something else should come out of it, and so forth. So you always, there has to be this another city which has to come up, and the existing city, there can't be a gradual change which can come here, so it should be left to what it is possibly. So the amelioration of the old city is not optimal, whether by all stretch of imagination or use of resources, or if you're trying to remove the inequality which has set into this post-industrial city, it is not possible by any flight of imagination and the kind of ideas which you might bring to the city. So let's not waste time doing that. Let's go in for radical reconstruction. Now, when we go in for this kind of a radical reconstruction of the city, we are going to demolish certain parts, and we are going to, completely erase certain parts, or we are going to look at newer grounds outside the city where these cities could actually be conceived as new towns, model towns, garden cities, and so forth. Then, not to forget that at the same time, these thinkers were also influenced by the waves of socialism at that point of time. So Ebenezer Howard, for that matter, again cooperative socialist by his ideological leanings. And then you had Frank Lloyd Wright, who happened to be related to the decentrist movement. And all these people then used these so-called political economic underpinnings also in framing their utopias. And in order to treat or to understand that the current cities were sort of temporary aberrations, and by this new origin of thought itself, they could eradicate the social, economic, environmental issues completely from the city. So this was the kind of restructuring or radical process of thought which started, and which contributed immensely to the planning literature at that point of time, and that is the literature which we so depend upon even to this day. So when you see this web, we have these whole lot of utopian thinkers bringing forth their ideas. Here I just mentioned a few of them, but there are so many others who don't find that kind of a popularity which these people actually achieved. So of course, some of the most influential, as we see in this web, Ebenezer Howard, by his sort of individual leanings, Wright was more a believer of individualism, and therefore the thought that everybody must be able to own at least an acre of land, everybody must have this access to automobile. So this was exactly the kind of utopian ideas which were coming at that point of time. And on the other side, we have Lewis Mumford and Patrick Geddes and so on, the ones whose, it's not really their ideas in terms of utopia, but the critique of the city which is important for us to consider as planners. So during the same time period, I mean, on one side you have Ebenezer, on the other side you have Patrick Geddes, and at the same span of time, one who is forwarding these ideas of garden cities very strongly, and the other who's talking about the existing city. And Patrick Geddes, for that matter, he stands directly opposite to Ebenezer Howard to say that what utopia are you really talking about? If the utopia really exists, it is here and nowhere, which means it's the existing city, and it cannot be outside the existing city. So the moment you say that the utopia, there's this need for a new town, but because the existing city cannot be taken care of anymore, probably there is something dynamically wrong as well in the whole idea of the understandings of the city itself. So Patrick Geddes, his folk, place and work, everybody is familiar with this. He coined this slogan which became one of the slogans which was picked up by planners as well. And the idea was to incorporate these three dimensions into our city planning at a later point of time. And then the three S's again by Patrick Geddes. And if you remember them, because all of you might have actually, you must be familiar with them. So sympathy, which means you must approach the city with some kind of an empathy. All right? So there must be some kind of a synergy. There must be some kind of a synchronized, notions in the city. And on the other side, then Lewis Mumford was greatly impacted by the work of Patrick Geddes. In fact, he treated Patrick Geddes as his mentor, and there was a lot of communication and exchange between the two on what really, the critique of the existing city and what possibly could be done. In fact, some of the seminal work again comes from Lewis Mumford, Culture of Cities and the City in History, which every planner obviously knows about, and his use of metaphors in order to write about the various dimensions of the city. So on one side, Lewis Mumford was, a bit critical or rather, should I say, cautious about the machine age. And at the same time, he was optimal or optimistic in the sense he thought that the machine age could actually be used to for the betterment of mankind, provided it is controlled in a certain way. So his use of metaphors, particularly the use of the word magnet, the use of the word necropolis is something which I find really fascinating, because when he uses the word necropolis, he says that ultimately every civilization will meet its necropolis if it does not pay attention to some of the classic sort of symptoms which are coming up, you see. So even the cities which we are having today, we are exposed to these very classic symptoms. I mean, these symptoms could be manifested in terms of the kind of environments in which we live. Okay, when we talk about pollution, for that matter, when we talk about the kind of the built environments, etc., all these are some things which are displaying these classic symptoms. So can we catch them in time to prevent that kind of degradation in the city? So his use of metaphors, for example, he uses the word pentagon, and there he talks about the obsession of mankind at that point of time with the mega machine and mega structures and mega power itself. So if we are not able to balance them, then they are definitely going to create some kind of a necropolis for the city. So in this way, each one of these, so the web which I sort of just created here, each one of them has contributed immensely. Whether or not you agree with their ideas, it doesn't really matter, but the impact on planning theory and planning practice has been remarkable, definitely. So some of their seminal works are worth having a look at. And moving on from here, yeah, so some of the planning responses which came from these utopian thinkers and which had a real range of influence worldwide, the movements which we've heard of, so model and new factory town movements, and we were speaking a little bit about this yesterday, one of the works coming up from Sir Robert Owen, and Lanark is one of the landmark works. Then again, in case of England, the work of J.S. Buckingham is remarkable. The creation of Bournville, Saltire are some of the remarkable works towards model and new factory town movement. And garden city movement has been influential and continues to be influential even now. The city beautiful movement, so we were talking about expositions this morning, and the Chicago exposition for sure, and also the fact that there was this slogan which came up from Daniel Burnham when he says, make no small plans, which means your plans should be really big, monumental scales, and they are the ones which will be reflectors of your both political symbolism, your power, as well as the power of the machine age. So these movements were happening at this particular time dimensions. And then the parks and conservation movement, which started again possibly in the US, if I'm not wrong. George Perkin Marsh, he writes a book, Man and Nature, and then he talks about the fact that nothing really is going to be abundant in this world. So there is a myth of abundance. And if that is the case, then we need to preserve the green spaces and create these green spaces in our towns and cities. And the same movement, a lot of contribution was made by Frederick Olmsted as well. And he, in fact, mentioned that a park or a garden is not really an ornament. It is a requirement. It's an organic requirement of a town or a city. So let's not forget about that. So these movements created a whole wave of utopia, in the sense utopia in practice, how to bring it into realization. And we have some classic examples from different parts of the world. So realizing utopia, for example, Brasilia is a take of the new capital of Brazil, wherein Lucio Costa and his colleague Oscar Niemeyer. So he's the one who, both these architects, they together try to create this vision of a dynamic city. And the monumental scale, the monumental axis of the city, the monumental dimensions of the city are very much visible. And as of today, the population of the city is about, say, 2.5 million or so. Then there are other examples from across the US, and one of the examples which I came across was the examples in suburban development by William Levitt and his company and sons. So they created these 7 suburban developments in different parts of the US. And again, the idea was to provide the middle classes with the independent house where everyone had a backyard and access to the automobiles as well. The only thing was that this kind of a township was also highly racist, because it was only meant for the white population at that point of time. So the realization, some realization of these ideas, in addition to the garden cities which were already coming up in England, okay. Then closer home, we have the new capital of Pakistan, Islamabad. And then everybody is definitely familiar with Chandigarh as well. So ultimate experiments are trying to combine utopianism with realism as well. And the picture on the other side, which you see, is from China, and one of the first SEZs in China, Shenzhen. And this is the city which just had a population of about 30,000, and today it has, I think, more than 11 million or something like that. Now, this is one which is emblematic in the sense it's trying to realize that great Chinese, it's living the great Chinese dream, but not to forget the stark side of it, because there's a stark side of it that on one side you have this wealth and power which it showcases, but on the other side you also have the living conditions of the laborers, which is very well demonstrated in the sense that some of the highest suicide rates are also in these cities. So in a very short span, I just wanted to throw light on the kind of utopian ideas which have developed, and each one of these thinkers which you see here, and many more, not to forget the clash of philosophies between Robert Moses and Jean Jacobs as well. So all these people have contributed in many different ways in the rich literature that we have today, and the idea is whether we can make some sense of this this imagination, and the way whether we can really use it in our contemporary cities. So coming to the other side of it, I mean, this was one chapter which deals with the utopian side and its contribution to planning literature. On the other side, if I may say so, you might have heard of the critical realism theory. Roy Bhaskar is the proponent of this particular theory. And now, what is the theory of critical realism? This theory says that the world is more than you know. So it is not just your knowledge. The world exists independently of our knowledge. And this knowledge is fallible and theory dependent, which means fallible in the sense it means that there could be something, this is subject to any kind of failures. I mean, your knowledge is not necessarily absolute. And every knowledge has some kind of a theory behind it. And all of us, at every point of time when we develop some kind of judgments, they are essentially based on some ideas related to theory. Now, there are three dimensions to this development of critical realism. What are these three dimensions? So you have on one side empirical, actual, and real. Empirical is the one which is the smallest dimension, and it is primarily the understanding of the events of situations as subject to some kind of a scientific inquiry. So this may be put to scientific inquiry by us as observers or as people who are studying this particular phenomena. Now, on the other side, the actual, which means there are events and situations which exist beyond what inquiry we are actually conducting. So you have these events which are being observed by you, and then you have these events and situations which are not being observed by you, but the fact that they are not being observed by you does not mean that they are not existing. So that is the second point. The third, which takes into consideration both of them, is the entire span, also considering the underlying causes and mechanisms which lead to these events and situations presenting themselves the way they are presenting. So these are the three dimensions of critical realism, and Peter Ness, in his paper on critical realism and urban planning, has tried to actually bring about not only a correlation but the significance also of understanding this theory in order to understand the planning processes and the planning dimensions in more ways than one. So what is the real situation now? Now, the real situations which we are dealing with is that by 2025, at least 400 cities will have a population of about, say, 1 million or more, and 93 super cities will have population above 5 million. So 3/4 of the world's largest cities will be in developing countries that already have trouble in terms of housing, feeding the populations, and employing as well. Well, this is again another interesting observation here, and for example, 58 times the land area of London is needed to supply its residents with resources. So we can imagine the kind of carbon footprint and the kind of burden which every city is sort of exerting on its immediate, hinterlands and resource bases. Each city whether it is a small or a big city, has a number of inputs and outputs. And it is this imbalance which is also reflected in the kind of, the issues and challenges which we face today. A real city in the developing world, we don't have to go far because we are very much a part of it, may look something like this. So, and not to forget, I don't have to name this, but everybody knows what we are talking about, the island of opulence. And if we look at this mega structure, then possibly this was constructed on a prime piece of land, which was actually the Waqf land, meant for an orphanage. So everybody, I assume, knows the structure. And so you have these extreme sort of variations in the city. And the question is, can utopian ideas or can a healthy understanding of critical realism blend or improve our understanding of dealing with these cities or these situations rather? Also looking at some of the data that the deficiencies in the provision of basic services are stark, and they are likely to multiply by the year 2030. So whether it is water supply or sewage or solid waste or transportation or affordable housing, so there are going to be significant gaps by... Oh, no worries. Okay. All right. And coming to perhaps one of the last points here, there has been this very sort of, I would say, for the last couple of years, you've been hearing a lot of terminologies, but one terminology which has outdone all other terminologies is the smart city. Now, everybody seems to know about the smart city and the word smart, but nobody seems to have a very apt definition about it, including our own, the government machinery as well. Now, we already know that we have moved very intensely into this particular smart city mission. And the idea is to create physical, social, economic, and institutional sort of upgradation in our cities. And there are 4 things which a smart city is primarily looking at. And one of them is retrofitting existing cities, which means with the help of people, you actually choose areas, about 500 acres, that will be selected. And then you retrofit or improve this particular city, part of the city, sorry. The second is about redeveloping at least 50 acre plus of area. The third is green fields where you have a land space of at least 250 acres. And the fourth is pan-city initiatives, which means that you use technology in order to make the city much more livable or much more appropriate, if I may say so. Now, we have these different responses, and I am not going to deliver any judgment on this or whether it is right or wrong. The question is that we all have to sort of make our own, opinions on this. And whether it is real or whether it is an escapist idea, or whether we really think that this idea is going to take away all our problems from the existing cities. Now, this is something which is highly debatable. And as you know, that this is one of the landmark projects of the government of India. More than $15 billion have actually been pumped into this particular project. And as we speak, I think there is a plan for expansion of this project as well. Now, with this background then, the question remains, utopia and realism, can the two ever meet? If yes, how could we really bring these ideas together? Is there a possibility of a perfect city? Because utopia, the ideas actually dream of perfection or something which is almost close to a state of perfection. So do you think that is ever going to happen? I leave it to you to deliberate more on this particular, question. The idea was just to sort of stimulate a debate on this. And based on this then, there is a question that we have. But before we come to that question, possibly, all right. So we'll come to the small video clips that we have. If there is any need for a clarification or anything which you would like to add, please feel free to ask. Myth. Myth is something which is perceived as some kind of reality, but the moment when you say that you busted a myth, what does that mean? When you busted a myth means कि अभी तक जो सच लग रहा था वो सच नहीं है. Alright, till now you thought that this is how it has been or it would be, but after actually reaching something which was based upon your, जिसमें हमने आपको triangle एक दिखाया था, उसमें one of the aspects was empirics. So when you have conducted a scientific inquiry, you might actually reject something which was till today prevailing as something as a sort of a reality. So myth is something which might not necessarily or is actually not true. But myth is not really something which has anything to do with utopia. All right. All right. So there's this. All right. There is this. I think it's about 17 or 18 minutes. This is a small video which emerges from a project which is called, I find it difficult to pronounce, so that's why I look, Nantur project. The idea of this project was to create some kind of platform for people with multiple ideas, intellectual, stimulations. And as a part of this project, this is one of the protagonists here. It undertakes a view of these different cities around the world, and the video is titled "The Cities of the Future." So you might just have a look at this video, and then we'll come back to the other one.
This is the sound of a garbage truck in Taipei, a subway in Seoul, 3:30 in Santiago, Auckland, Singapore, Copenhagen, Los Angeles, Sydney, London, Nairobi, Venice, Shenzhen, Mumbai, and Songdo. That's in South Korea. Awfully quiet. I ended up here because I was looking for the city of tomorrow. Songdo is the largest private real estate development in history. It's a master planned and entirely state-of-the-art smart city. While Songdo doesn't look like that future, some believe it's the future we need.
It's only impossible until someone does it.
It's also where they shot it.
Oppa Gangnam Style!
Just 25 years ago, Psy would have been dancing on this. Here are some other cities built on water.
There is a race to build a functioning, workable city and to replicate that model all over the world.
China alone would require 500 Songdos to sustain their growing population. So how do we get here with an entire industry racing to build smart cities from scratch?
Technology is the answer, but what is the question?
Good question, Carlo. Are we just building cities of the future so we can have cities of the future? Let's take a step back. When cinema was born, only 14% of the world's population lived in cities. Right now, we're at 54%. And this is where we're headed.
Cities today are growing at a pace that none of us have ever understood.
Now, that's a huge deal when you think about it, because the resources that built the megacities of the 20th century aren't sustainable today.
We do damage to nature, and we do less damage to nature when we occupy less of it.
We're not going to make our planet grow and thrive by continuing to sprawl out.
They're basically saying that when density is done right, it's the best, if not the only, solution to our growing climate crisis. So is future urbanization going to be a good thing or a bad thing? If you care about people, this is the defining question of our time. The Nantucket Project asked me to explore that question, because that's what they do, explore. So I read books, talked to experts, traveled around the world, asked the internet for help, and got responses from people in all these cities.
This is Lucas, we met on YouTube.
They'd show me around, and when I couldn't visit in person, they'd send me footage. The best thing about cities and the internet is they connect people. So this movie's about exploring what an even more connected urban future could look like.
There is a renaissance in the city, and I'm honored to be a participant in the Detroit story.
That was Mayor Jerome Patton making a bid for the 1968 Olympics. 50 years later, population still in decline, Detroit went bankrupt.
In 2014, we had the water shut-offs in Detroit,
Thousands of homes lost water due to shutoffs.
and I wanted to focus on how to resolve that. So I created an application called City Water that's going to give Detroit residents their water usage in real time.
That might sound boring compared to a drone delivering your pizza, but let's remember that cities only reached their full potential when they became healthier places to live.
Start of the 20th century, America's cities are spending as much on water as the federal government is spending on everything, except for the post office and the army.
We've come a long way to an exciting era
is a best. You saw my video announcing the project and wanted to make sure the city made the cut.
I was born here, and I'm really passionate about bringing the city back to the point it was. We're not Silicon Valley, but we're trying to become a city that brings tools and brings solutions and brings jobs back.
To have a smart city, but whatever new innovation it comes, if it helps me, I'm gonna embrace it.
And it's really encouraging just the fact that the city is willing to do a project like this. And we're hoping to launch that in January of 2017 and take that to other cities across the country.
Because cities inherently just don't compete with each other, there's a huge opportunity to collaborate with other cities.
We can take the best practices in sustainable urbanization and spread them around the world as quickly as possible. That is the promise of the 21st century of urbanization.
It's easy to imagine adopting a Bess's app in Santiago. And Los Angeles is a city that's never taken water for granted.
Well, what can we do? The rest of the city needs drinking water.
Water again.
We use water from 1,400 miles away. That is transported long distances using over 19% of our entire energy budget for the state of California.
David uses solar power to turn air into clean water, which he gives away for free to his city or sometimes turns into food. Awesome.
Every building ideally can make its own water and be water self-reliant.
In the same way future cities won't need telephone lines, maybe they also won't need water pipes.
You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Be water, my friend. Like that.
I see, I get the idea.
When people are innovating and developing solutions to address our most fundamental needs, a city will thrive.
What kind of cities do we want? How do we want to interact as people in cities? Because cities aren't buildings, they're people.
Part of the job of urban success means to attract and produce skilled people and to retain skilled talent.
This goes together in a city. Opportunity and solving problems as they arise, innovating.
Detroit is innovating right now, probably kind of like the way it was in the 1890s, when over 100 companies were working furiously to figure out the automobile. That's also like Silicon Valley in the 60s and 70s, Bangalore in the 80s, and Shenzhen, where 90% of the world's drones are manufactured right now.
There's at least 26% of the technology from Silicon Valley actually come from Shenzhen.
Cities are more complicated than the headlines they make on the other side of the world. There's no YouTube in Shenzhen, so nobody saw my video there. Fortunately, George goes to school in Hong Kong, where he saw the movie and emailed me. Then he filmed Shenzhen when he went home on the weekend. Thanks, George. Like Songdo, Shenzhen was not a city 25 years ago. And like many other cities, they built giant American-style highways.
Currently, the U.S. has policies that we're using general tax revenues to fund highways. We're basically subsidizing people to drive.
And that's why it's cheaper to drive to the grocery store to buy blueberries from 4,000 miles away than it is to walk over to the farmer's market and buy local. Can you tell I'm eating blueberries?
You can tell you're eating what you got.
Our subsidies and policies encourage bad habits, but the false message we send globally is that big highways solve problems.
Transportation's been a very sleepy field for 50 years. You're starting to see people rethink what our streets are about and who they're for.
Now cities are spending money getting rid of highways, confirming that more transportation choices and less parking are often the best ways to fight traffic and congestion.
This used to be a motorway, now it's a public space. So you got green space, shade, clean water, natural cooler temperature in the area, and sure enough, traffic got better.
Seoul is turning another highway into a path for people. Paris is going full pedestrian along the Seine. In Singapore, where they just debuted a self-driving taxi, they're also building a city with no cars. Same thing in
Mannheim, Germany,
which ironically is where this guy invented the first car.
The future of our cities is about people. That really does mean focusing on public transportation and providing choices for how people get around.
The number one factor that determines whether someone can escape poverty, you either think it'd be crime rates or school, is commute time.
When walking, cycling, and public transportation are the fastest ways to move, nobody feels like a second-class citizen for not owning a car.
That's going to be the secret sauce for cities in the 21st century.
Check out all these Metro cards. That last one's from Singapore, where I didn't meet a single person who owns a car.
It's hard to beat the Singaporeans.
In Singapore, a Toyota Corolla costs $140 grand, and the government only lets you lease it for 10 years.
The fact that they embraced having something that actually charges people for the social cost of their driving is a policy that basically all crowded cities should be embracing.
In Santiago, you can get around in this electric rickshaw for free. The design came from China. Let's go back there.
Hi, Oscar.
I actually never went to Shenzhen.
I see you over the internet.
George and Nina shot the interview and I tuned in on Skype. Remember those giant American-style highways? That's what Shenzhen had in mind when they hired Vicky.
We proposed to them a very different idea. Instead of increasing the highway, we reduce it. And then we prepare for a city where people can actually use more high-speed self-driving car. People can actually use drones to deliver daily grocery.
Hiding cars in tunnels points towards a city made for people. Maybe we could try this in Los Angeles. Considering how quickly China went from this to that, and from that to this, it's not surprising this project is happening in Shenzhen.
The excitement of a happening place which attracts people, you have to have a degree of openness and not too much regulation.
Shenzhen spends more time making things than hiring patent lawyers to protect them.
In the West, it's called theft. Out here, it's called sharing.
And if you want to know more about that, you should watch my friend Jim's documentary. The point is, it's exciting to live in a city where people are making things. That's why I moved to New York, because I was drawn to all these people who were doing more with less. The most elusive solutions often spring from unlikely places.
Geothermal energy power plant.
This is a fog catcher, and it can get up to 500 liters of water a day.
If you can do something good with low budget resources, you can scale up very rapidly.
Sometimes those solutions can end up shaping a city's identity. In Lagos, which is where this music is from, by the way, they call it kanji.
The word literally means like hustling. Trying to reimagine these challenges in Africa as opportunities to innovate is the spirit of kanju.
Flooding is an issue in Makoko, so they built a school that floats by using cheap and available materials. This woman turns discarded plastic into bricks in Karachi. In Nairobi, nobody uses credit cards or cash, all you need is a phone. In Manila, they turn water bottles into solar light bulbs. And the people of India have always made more out of less. The inexpensive clay fridge that requires no electricity or their hyper-efficient, massive homemade meal delivery system could never have been conceived by some well-heeled think tank. Dr. Joachim has lived in the slums for 50 years, built 1 million houses and toilets, been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and brought his organization, Slum Dwellers International, to 43 different countries.
We don't need you to come and sit on my head and dance. I know how to write my song. It is my dance, my song, I will play it.
He's basically saying, we got this. If you want to help, channel your support through us. For example, here's a self-run recycling operation in Joachim's neighborhood. We all want to be involved in the futures of the places where we live.
You go and see every city in the world. All has been planned by very, very super well-known, renowned architect and philosopher and so on and so forth. You have lost all the sense of hearing from the people.
Unfortunately, a lot of architects have a sort of a pre-designed approach that they force into whatever context and culture they get to.
And not every city can be like Singapore, where 80% of the people live in public housing.
So that means you don't have slums, nor do you leave the city and its residents in the hands of the private rental sector.
Back to Mumbai. We tend to disregard places like Dharavi, where Dr. Joachim lives, but it's a rare example of a neighborhood solving its own housing needs. My friend Matthias works to draw attention to what's actually working in neighborhoods before attempting to intervene. He compares Mumbai to post-war Tokyo.
American planners started to focus on infrastructure development. Everything else was left to people themselves. And that created the gradual growth of a neighborhood.
Like Tokyo in the 1950s, it's your neighbors planning and building your home in Dharavi.
Up to 90 people can be working on a school site for 4 weeks and produce a house of much better quality than the affordable housing that the government is developing.
And embodying the kind of incremental growth private developers rarely aim for.
The places that are self-built, we often see an incredible amount of care, feeling of ownership, a human scale in terms of what is actually being built.
How do we combine the genius that's really there in the streets, it's solving its own problem? How do we then bring in a little bit of outside technology or better public management in order to upgrade them and to empower their citizens' lives more effectively?
Post-war Tokyo, unlike Mumbai, had major funding and state-of-the-art infrastructure. And 30 years later, it was the city of the future.
That's not my kind of place.
Go someplace else.
I don't think so, Mr. Decker.
Around the same time that Tokyo was booming, Copenhagen was struggling.
In the 70s, we had a couple of energy crises. People started to fight for getting better bicycle infrastructure, and the city gradually started developing that mobility system.
In many ways, it is Copenhageners who have wanted to get their city back.
Denmark's capital insists on citizen-driven change.
I think part of Copenhagen's success is that they've had a very incremental approach to the urban development. Instead of having this giant master plan, they've tested and tried out different solutions.
Low-rise, mixed-use neighborhoods, great public space, clean water. This new power plant turns waste into clean energy. And it's a ski slope.
We don't think ourselves only as designers and architects. We think about ourselves also as social scientists.
The best part is they still think they can do better.
We have very far to go in actually creating an urban environment where cars the last choice for the ordinary citizen.
If you buy a car in Denmark, you pay 150% tax. It doesn't matter if it's electric.
Destination, please.
I'm super excited about self-driving cars, but without good planning and policy, we might just end up being more comfortable sitting in traffic jams.
For a collection of microprocessors, you're awfully touchy.
Of course, it's possible to make any city around the world a good bicycle city.
And the more we get public transit, the more room there'll be for one of the very best kinds, bicycles.
You could start with getting more people mobilized on foot and on bicycle, and it's so cheap to be sweet to people than it is to actually having to support these heavy transport systems.
A person on a bike puts 165,000. A person on a bike puts a fraction of the wear and tear that the average car puts on the road. And as you'll remember, roads don't pay for themselves. Since I started editing this project, New York City Bike has broken daily ridership records 6 times. And the cool part is you can see all the data gathered from the program in real time.
In the past, our streets have really been governed by anecdotes instead of analysis. And so we brought very focused, data-driven approaches to analyze the impacts of our projects.
And so really seeing how we can take technology and not kind of replace what we're able to do, but kind of enhance our ability to interact with our environment.
Well, then what do you want to do?
I don't know. Something.
Wow.
Some think that technology is going to make us more physically isolated.
People will stop moving around. Right. They just won't need to. You basically connect your brain to the internet and you turn off your senses, and the senses come from the internet. And so you can feel this exact setting. Why would you get in the car? Why would you get on a plane?
I just couldn't imagine that, and the whole point of this video was to go to real places and connect with real people, mostly in person. I also made this video with these people, and for these people. It's kind of like a city. Thinking hard about who we're making them for and who we're changing them with is always a good starting point.
Super tired.
Okay, I'm exhausted. I'm sure you're exhausted. And I barely scratched the surface, but that's what I got. Bye-bye, Copenhageners. Bye, Singaporeans. Bye, Songdonians. Bye, Mumbaiakers. I'm going to leave you with this quote from the great Jane Jacobs. Lowly, unpurposeful, and random as they may appear, sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life may grow. Cities remind us how much we benefit from and actually desire to share physical space with other people. But that doesn't mean one city can't learn from another. And the speed at which we're sharing what we're learning, the speed at which I connected with an army of filmmakers all over the world to make this video, was the most encouraging part of the experience. And while every city was exciting, it was the people in every city that made me optimistic for the future.
All right. So that was this quite an engaging and an interesting video, and on the Future of Cities project, as I mentioned initially. Now, what we are going to do is, this is going to be an exercise for our audience here. I mean the GIAN participants and the others who happen to be in this hall. So what do we have here? It's just a sort of a question here. With an overview of utopian visions and realism, deliberate within your group and assume a position on the spectrum of utopia and realism. Based upon the position and stand that you take, detail out how the following deliverables can be achieved for the city Pragati. So you can name it anything, but we call it Pragati at the moment, which is a contemporary growing city demographically with influx of migrants but facing immense physical, social, economic, and environmental challenges. You must identify these challenges and sketch out a blueprint for achieving the following deliverables. So the deliverables are there in front of you. Now, what we wanted basically was, and I hope you all are all happy to do that, is to just organize yourself in groups of maybe 7 or 8. And then we distribute handouts to you. So once you have your brainstorming, we can have a group here, and we can have a group there at that table, or a group going right wherever you want to sit. And then whatever you produce, we put it up here as handouts. So we would really like you to get involved. It doesn't matter. It's just sort of a, should I say, a brainstorming game for that matter. So I would really appreciate if all of you could take a moment to just stand up. On the back, in the middle center row. Organize the way you would like. Looking at the constraint of the chairs, etc. that we have, we could have some of you coming up. And we'll distribute the material to you very shortly. So we'll possibly do one thing. Please, you're welcome to come here. There's no common space here. Group of 7 or 8. Just organize yourself, break up, and then sit down, brainstorm. We'll give you the material in the meantime, and then you do your write-up and then we create. No more. 5 sheets. Informally battles, there's no commenting now in this room. Can you sweat on the ground, you won't have a problem. Young friends can sweat. It's a battle. Use the space to the best of your ability. बैठ के देखो You have just about 25 minutes to end this exercise, so please be mindful of the time. By now you've been distributed the sheets, the cutouts. On these cutouts you write your whatever you think in bold, okay, the way you do in your studio. And then you must paste your group's work on one of these panels here. All right?
लाइट बंद करवा दो लाइट है वो प्रोजेक्टर पर सवाल है राजा पता नहीं लाइट
Please be mindful of time. 25 minutes and your handouts must be ready.
हाँ जी परीक्षा
अब यार सुनामी आएगी, सुनामी कंपस की तरह एक मशीन होगी ना घूमेगी वैसे टोमेटो आ जाएगा सर्कल ऐसा मिलता है
ये ना सुमित ने कल कराया ना कोई बात नहीं ये मेन सुमित को दे दे जमा करा के मेरे को हाँ सुबह उसको क्या ना मनिंदर का भी दिया था अरबाब ने और ये भी जमा कराया
कितने टाइम
वो भी रीजनल एकेडमिक अफेयर्स का भी ये सारे यहाँ तू ही चले जा अभी हाँ हाँ रजिस्ट्रार अकाउंट में जा पहले पर्ची मेरे को भेज दे
अपने सर्टिफिकेट देना करो जरा पीएनएल
You want water?
No, I'm fine.
किसी को भेज दे
ये तुम साइकिल चलाते हैं ये साइकिल से मार इससे मारे ना उसे इसको वाला का दिखाई तो जादू करती है कल मैं क्वेश्चन का मैंने प्रीवियस वन कर ली थी Don't get that
Even if the data themselves are not the same. In this protocol.
The Mughals did not have any permanent department to look after education. They used to aid lab. ये कल तो जाते हाँ कोई कहते हैं अभी रखो आप अपने पास वॉलेट में
सर चाय से सब और कल प्रिंट आउट लेके किरण मैम से चेक लेना एंड फोटो ये फिर मुझे कल किरण मैम से चेक लेना और प्रिंट आउट मेरे से लेना है प्रिंट आउट पे आके चेक लेना फोटो भी है
अपने मिसेस को ले आना परसों ले आना
पूरा दिन तो बोर हो गई
मैं व्हाई डोंट यू प्ले नहीं दैट्स माय शी विल नॉट डन समथिंग ले आओ कैसे ले आओ या तो ना हिंदी पंजाबी से हो तो चलो
Sandu sir can take ideas from Taser.
Well, we can see what this will do something.
मेल उसने कर दी मुझे।
Okay? Then your wall is waiting for you.
मैम 1300 है उसका कॉस्ट 64 GB आपका कितना होगा कितना GB होगा 64 वाला ऑर्डर किया मैंने तो 3 दिन में 30 हुआ 32 भी हो गया साढ़े 5 रुपये 5 रुपये जैसे आपको मजा
Group number 33.
आप किरण बाग ने फेसबुक पे डाल दिए संडे भी देखा तुम लोग भी किसी को पार्टिसिपेट कर लो हम भी वो ग्रुप है
जो पूरी सिटी दिखेगी
गपशप मारी था
जैसे उसे
Could be that one, it could be that one. Deving from Manish
बोले स्टॉप करो नहीं तो कॉपी पेस्ट शुरू हो जाती है
कॉपी पेस्ट नहीं
उनकी कॉपी पेस्ट होना उन पे
कॉपी पेस्ट चलेगा भी नहीं है दस मिनट कॉमन वन एक्सरसाइज 2-3 मिनट
तो मैं भी क्या कहती हूँ वही करूँगा सब कुछ में आता जो कुछ ये 4 सीटर देंगे
यही तो चाहिए ना, रोड पे क्यों आए, रोड के नीचे आएगा तो एक ही नहीं है, थोड़ी होगा, मल्टीपल पॉइंट्स होगा।
If you don't mind. So, can we have?
Where is it? Okay, speak up so that all of you
This first sheet will be explained by the Raval sir.
They have given mic to me anyways. Yeah. Residing in the city for the last approx for 36 years. Sandhu sir, please. We have proposed the city as a green and the solar rooftops for the available rooftops in the city to regenerate the electricity, and the electricity generated so can be easily used by the units themselves, or it can be uplinked to the grid. So the whole of the city being the environmentally good. Next is having an accessible design on the 3 levels. That's the city level, neighborhood level, and the district level. So different various design options need to be identified and checked with. Here's come another one important part, that is identification of the dilapidated structures, or the structures where there is a scope to get the green area accommodated. Again, the green spaces, their hierarchies in terms of all the 3 levels. So the bigger spaces of green, the smaller and the smaller, so that the children at the neighborhood level can be catered to, the city level and the small district or the precinct level can be taken. The concept of urban forests, we were thinking of that somewhere it could be done. Reduction of heat islands to maintain the say the green impact on the city. Along the wall city, now we have a wall city around 13 meters to 43 meters of carriageway. What we propose, the initial designs of the wall city followed in the Ranjit Singh time period. The same typology of same crossing of road can be proposed here. We have a building line to building line. The whole of the carriageway is used as of now. So what we do is we define one constant magnitude or a fixed magnitude of the complete carriageway on the floor, and it should be only the one-way traffic revolving on the one single side. And the interior of the wall city again have a one small road, and that can be taken to the other side of the traffic. So that can be weaved out. So easily weaving of the traffic can be done on the along the wall city. Further, because this is home of a low-lying area and where the water accumulates during rainy season, so what we propose is that traditionally there was a moat around the wall, the city wall. So that moat, it should be recarnated and can be landscaped well, so that the whole of the water can be just turned around the wall city, and giving the water to go off, and it should not accumulate at a one point. So making a traditional moat with a huge green belt. So this is now, this can vary, but this remains constant. And on the other side, we have the service lane and the pathway. So total of 13 to 43 meter carriageway. Yeah. Okay. Last two. We are proposing to have underground tunnels to reach at the central areas of Harmandir Sahib so that there can be the traffic congestion can be released out. In other proposals, as a green and say a livable city, we have a uniform print along the corridors, along the roads, so that's a one. Second is making a inclusion of the various hawkers and the persons who are selling their commodities along the road and the service lane. And where they are sitting, from there we can widen up the service lane, or it can be redirected from that way. Furthermore, the whole of the grills along the BRTS corridors can be made in the creeper walls so that the vertical greens can be made. Further, I think Sir Dua can explain.
Just another thing, idea which makes everything inclusive, and everything inclusive as well as equitable is the right of a citizen to use the space, the public spaces. Sir, the right of the people and ordinary person of any economic hierarchy to use and consume the city equally, he should feel it that the city belongs to him. For that, they need to, the only strongest point which we personally realized is the emphasizing of the public real. One, increasing the quality of life so that he can use the spaces more, spend leisure time there more rather than simply commuting. And for that, you need to have lesser work distance, better equitable spaces, distribution of spaces, lesser conflict, lesser distances between home and workplace, and efficient waste management to make the city clean and hygienic. So this is how we, the strongest point without going into technicality is the reclaiming of the public real, the public space. That's it.
I feel especially perturbed by the quality of living that we have in our cities these days. And like not talking of the environmental, I am kind of focusing on the social concerns. Because of the least of the interactions that we have within our society, I mean, this is leading to so many issues related to crime and so many gender issues. And to some extent, it is a lot, the problem is a little, I mean, too much because of the increasing distances, because of a lot of time that we have to spend on commuting on daily basis. I do see a ray of hope in, I mean, if we pedestrianize our areas, I see we enhance the chances of interactions, and that may kind of serve to some extent, I mean, reducing those kind of problems. So if we have all our, I mean, area levels, the neighborhoods kind of well pedestrianized, so that, I mean, and more and green areas within those neighborhoods where people can more and more interact. So that means we in a larger way, we can be addressing those kind of social concerns.
Well, I think on a positive note, I think the group has really tried. They've come out with some very interesting observations and points here related to the reclaiming of the public space in particular, and you know, improving the quality of life as well. Well, some issues could have obviously been addressed, but I guess given the time span, you need to brainstorm a little bit more to actually arrive at that point of time. But I think within the constraint of the time, and also that the question was, yeah. Yeah.
Is the idea here to generate utopia? Is it to respond to the problems that exist in our literature? Can we respond to the problem by coming up with utopia? Does utopia actually limit us? Or does thinking about the problems that exist in the city, utopia is that problem, something that physics would think utopia? And my answer to that question is absolutely yes. So in a sense, the unfortunate aspect of utopia came out clearly in the lecture. That utopia, in a sense, very often assumes or requires the Buddha lesson that I don't care for what is there. I don't care for the problem that you have. I'm going to give you an ideal form that may have come from space or have come from my mind. And in the process, I'm just simply inspiring you to think outside the box. What I got here is a master plan.
So,
inspired by big ideas, as if in fact we have the hand of God. And that's why I can ask you, because planets are really very important for planets. Who's the agent here? Like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Okay, well, to do this and to do that, it's impossible.
Yeah.
But even if I assume you become like China or not, even then, you can still do it. So in a sense, what you do is, it's like a utopia, nor a master plan. It's a master plan that's supposed to be utopia, but there is no mechanism.
Yeah, that is.
And maybe that's the hand of the exercise that's not here.
Yeah, actually, if you look at the exercise closely, then it does have this, and it was put there deliberately, the contradiction which you see there. So it is actually to put you in a position which is really, really dicey for you as well, because you're also expected, there is a mention of a spectrum there. So there is a spectrum which you actually choose, you hover somewhere in between, or you hover towards extreme utopia or extreme realism. So you are expected to actually choose a position, and probably that position then does not really emerge probably very clearly. So yeah, so that is, but anyway, that is what you're supposed to be, you know, understanding and engaging with. So you've tried, and I think it's a good job. Thank you all. Brilliant. Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Yes, yes, I guess so. So, thank you. Next group, 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, you tell us how you answered the question.
Good evening, everyone. With the help of our teachers, we came up with a concept that is with a vision, no discrimination of any citizen, which eliminates the discrimination with socioeconomic and environmental considerations. We have equality, inclusiveness in relation to all citizens working for self-actualization of their goals. Then we have equal access to facilities, no classification of income groups. Then citizens access to resources, health, sports, market, entertainment, employment, education, and environmental compatibility with regards to rainwater harvesting, zero waste, renewable energy, enhanced city carrying capacity, reduce carbon footprint, low carbon produce. Then all this we can achieve with the help of this model which we have designed. There is centrality that contains the city level facilities all at the center, public and semi-public land use. Then we have residential from which land use surrounding it along with the green spaces and the integration with the transportation land use in integration to transportation. Then around this we have with industrial spaces, commercial spaces, and also the water bodies that will act as the sponges for the wastewater of the city to absorb the wastewater. This is basically for renewable energy.
When the concept is totally based on the centralization to decentralization manner, then the activities which are more focused in the central areas, then the stays in the neighborhood planning process, and then the activities which are centralized, for solving the problem decentralized as per the demand of the citizens. The concept is clearly identifying the concept which are showing in the central elections, which are high facilities or decentralized the commercial activities by the residential areas established in the future. They are proposed commercial activities in the centrality and neighborhood. And these are the water bodies which are also used as disposal of the water and regenerate of water and recycle of water for the another uses like industrial use in the present and outside of the
main concept behind this is that all the citizens have equal rights in terms of access to resources, in terms of access to facilities, in terms of opportunities, in terms of markets. So they should be provided with the equal opportunity and no discrimination should be made. And this is a utopian concept. We all know that. And this is what we think, that if we want to have a Pragati city, so if this thing is followed, then only it can be achieved. Otherwise, there will remain problems which we are seeing in all the cities.
Basically, the city is trying to fulfill all the needs of the citizen, which are employment, entertainment facilities, health, medical, education, etc., including green lung spaces, and also the city is going to be self-sufficient in terms of water, which is the biggest constraint for any new city in the world. So we are having groundwater recharging through the green spaces, as well as lakes, which will act both as, which are in the surrounding, which will act as groundwater recharging, as well as entertainment, water entertainment facilities in the surrounding of the city, and also will make the city environment beautiful as well as livable.
Well, my only comment is that clearly, I mean, this is a utopia, and that's exactly how we envision it. But if part of the exercise is, you know, the ground between utopia and realism, and I like your statement very much about equity and achieving equality of cabinet. Does physical form have the capacity to achieve social concepts like equality? So if it does not, and we know that this planet, should we not try? Or is that the middle ground then that they're actually asking us for? I think that this is what this particular problem
coming forward with that, and some places are more excessive.
Yes, but my main comment is that sometimes the best utopias are not necessarily ones that have anything to do.
Actually, it's not necessarily geography may not allow such cities. It's true. It may be a part of it, like there may be a hill on that side, so it may be half of this could be possible. So there may not be exactly this. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. 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 Yeah. 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 Definitely. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Next, another group here.
5 minutes.
Just explaining the concept, a utopian realism. The basic concept or vision that goes behind this is, we've been studying all the cities, all the civilization organized or planned in a very disorganized manner, or in a very haphazard manner. So what we have tried to do up over here is we have tried to plan it in the most unplanned way. And by saying this, this is a branch city that we have imagined, or we would bring the concept up, in which these branched roads or the networks that play a very vital role in designing or in the of any city, in which at the center there is a water canal, in which the waterways would be used, because no matter how fast we are moving in these bullet trains, we are talking about jets, but let's make it more towards the realism. Anything that is utopian and cannot be implemented on ground, so there must be a scope for improvement and application. So that's what we have done, and all these small circular buildings or cases would be dedicated to the public buildings, in which anybody, the residences would be along the roadsides of a vertical city. That would be the need of the hour, as we know the land is getting diminished and in lesser number. So with the passage of time, we would be requiring this, and at least one side of each residence would be completely filled and fulfilled with the green areas. These would be the green areas that would be encompassing the entire city. And as soon as one reaches the node, that would be the epitome of that branch, in which all the public and all the facilities, let it be shopping, let it be financial, let it be public buildings, would be available for that person. So that each and everybody a chance to gather around, to have a better opinion and an interactive place. For that, this is a central space in which the entire city divides itself and divides itself, in which all these are the criteria that would be followed in the utopian city, which would tend toward the realism. That would be central waterways in which we will be using. Apart, there would be lesser number of roads. As we reduce the roads, we could surely imagine how easy and how sustainable things could be, because at this present point of time, any and everybody is talking about the sustainability, and sustainability is of uttermost importance, because until and unless one would not be alive, there is no need of things going on the other side. Minimum roads concept, ample of green on the rear side of each residences, of each building, so that the atmosphere, the micro or the macro climate of the entire city could be maintained and could be regularized. Each linear road leads to a public building, that we have already, and with the implementation or the use of plasticity, that is with the glass and the concrete that's been in very much into today's time, things could be made more easier and more, I guess, utopian. This I have already gone through this section of the. I've already read all these, and this is which tends to be. We were onto it, so that's an incomplete. So this is the anti-problem idea about that utopian realism.
I like what you guys did for a variety of reasons. When I look at the diagram that you actually have on top, it reminds me very much of what Kenzio Tang tried to do in the 1960s in Tokyo, in which he imagined an ideal city that is expanding in the ocean, if you will. When I look at the diagram that you have at the bottom of it, it scares me a bit because it reminds me of Blade Runner, the film, which what you have, you know, there's no utopia without a dystopia that is attached to it. And that's a fundamental component that you can never really imagine a utopia, and Thomas More is completely even aware of that in this regard. But it's mainly writers who have come considerably after him that have perfected this idea. So for me, there is the utopian impulse that you have in the diagram to the top, and the dystopian one, which is what we ended up with in the diagram that you have in the bottom. But one particular thing that you mentioned, which I actually find very encouraging, is you talked about the vertical city, the idea of a vertical city. I don't know if you know of the Vertical City project, which has been going on now in Singapore and in China, and then you guys, India participated in it. There are 12 publications right now that have been produced about it. For me, this is as close to the realization of a utopian idea, not utopia, as much as you can get. So, you know, you've managed to do quite well in this regard. Okay. One more. Two more.
किसने explain करना है? Students should
Hello. So this is basically, this picture explains how unplanned or lopsided Pragati would be if there would be no planning. Then here shows the migration of the people, the high towers, slums, all the physical, environmental, social, economic, all the problems without the planning. But as we are not only designers, we are not only architects, and we are not only concerned about design, we are social scientists as well. So utopia is basically a society where all are included, all inclusiveness in the matter of like resources distribution, so that it could help us to achieve the physical goals and environmental goals and other economic goals. So if our society will be well distributed, equity is there in our community resource distribution, it would be helpful for us to achieve the equality in physical planning, in social planning, and in other aspects of the planning. So this is one of the aspects. If we are producing more, we are growing more, if we are like doing everything excessive, then we are getting lots of waste also. So our concept as a utopian concept is that there is no waste, or the waste generated
or the waste generated of the growing city could be used as a resource also. So that we say the pragati in the growing, in the physical and all the aspects, there is a pragati in the waste also. So it could not be seen as a waste, it could be seen as a wealth. So our concept basically explains how can we use whole of the waste to produce the wealth out of it. And in a social use as a wealth. So it is a basic our utopian concept, which could be achieved by social changes, because we are also a social scientist. So it should be made as a societal impact so that we would achieve the physical, economic and other environmental aspects.
How does that fit resource?
Actually, equity is a very old concept, you know, as equality and equity is very, but it is not achieved, it cannot be achieved. May not. Yeah. So it is our utopia from very long ago that to achieve equity in all the resource, in the physical, economic, social and all the aspects. If we achieve equity in the social aspect, like equal distribution of the resource, this is not related to this as such you are expecting. This is now, this is not related to as you are expecting, it is fully, yeah. So this is the, this one. So, the, yeah. So it, no sir, it is the existing development, like how Pragati would, if there would not be the plant, if it would be a lopsided growth, like cities, people are migrating here and the, some people are waiting that city will come to us, and how Pragati would be lopsided, unequal. That would be existing situation if there would be no utopian. Our concept is like that. If it would be, concept would be like that, then it should not be so much unbalanced. The
Hello. Thank you. Good afternoon, all of you. Before starting our concepts, I want to quote something. What lies behind us and what lies ahead of us is no match what lies within us. So today.
That's a very good way to start. I mean, remember, anybody that is engaged in this utopia, they add it to its realism, which, you know, I regret because I would have liked to see what utopia you have in your mind, has to think or start from a point of inspiration. This is the first time we get one.
Today we all talk about smart cities, utopian concepts, but our concept is, are we planning wisely for the cities? So our concept is planning for the humans. How wisely in the form of transportation, in the form of environmental factors. So we included sort out some of the challenges in the cities, that is environmental degradation, and second one is non-inclusive. We achieve these environmental factors by public transport, transit oriented development, mixed land use planning.
As we know, the realities are changing very fastly, so we need to achieve what we need now, a further distance. Next, our factor is non-inclusiveness. Our transportation systems are not including disabled, not including each income category of the society, neither the gender. So we need to propose such things which include these all. Next, we have operation and maintenance.
We have seen that there are many projects which fail because we are not able to operate or maintain. So we have focused on operation and maintenance. There are few challenges, like we don't have funds to operate and maintain, but we implement those projects. There is lack of sense of belongingness among people to maintain and operate, and they are not willing to pay for that project. Then there is lack of public participation in every field. For management of funds, we have proposed that we can generate revenue from users itself, so that we are able to maintain these projects. And then cross-subsidizing, in which one sector, money generated from one sector can be utilized in another sector, so that we are able to operate and maintain.
What's the final diagram? Who's going to speak about that? Happiness. Happiness, and there's something cultural? Sociocultural, what, happiness? What is that?
You can never be happiness. Happiness is like a butterfly.
So, of all of the groups, you are the most realistic. There's absolutely no utopian thinking whatsoever.